All right, guys, so we had a high-stakes hearing in court the other day. This was not the Supreme Court on Kilmar Abrego Garcia, but it was a lower court on Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Judge Paula Zenis was the judge in the case. And, man, she was not playing around. So, look, we've talked about this. They're clearly in violation of multiple court orders. But to this point, they have not been ruled yet in contempt of court. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the exact procedure. But what I do know is it's not as simple as just saying, you're in contempt of court. There's a process you go through, right, before you come to that conclusion. Now, we are 100% on track to reach that conclusion. And it looks to me like Judge Zenis is dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's and making sure everything's perfect so that she can say, you're in contempt of court. And then when it goes to the Supreme Court, they go, yeah, dog, you're in contempt of court. So they're trying to make sure everything, for the sake of accuracy and for record keeping, is exactly right. So as you all know, there's been a bunch of cases around these illegal deportations with no due process to a slave labor camp in El Salvador. And you originally had a judge, Judge Boasberg, say, you got to turn this fucking plane around. You got a plane on the way to an El Salvador slave camp, and this person didn't even have a fucking hearing? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? This one was not about Kilmar. This was about somebody else. But they just denied that. They said, no, you have no authority because the plane's already over international waters. Your ruling doesn't stand. What? And then with Kilmar in particular, again, she is trying to find all the facts, right, and make a determination, and the government is giving her the runaround. Look, this is what I'm telling you guys. Not only are they evil, these people are also stupid, because it's not like there aren't clear and obvious loopholes to get the courts to side with them. But you'd have to show some willingness to be a good faith actor. Oh, yeah, we tried to do the thing, but it didn't actually work. Just like with the Supreme Court saying you got to facilitate his return. Obviously, if you're being both evil and competent, you'd say, we tried in good faith to get President Bukele to return him, and he said that we can't do that because there's a legal procedure in El Salvador that has to be done until we can send him back. And so we tried our best, and it's up to him. It's a sovereign country, but we tried, right? And they didn't do that. They just lied and were like, actually, the Supreme Court, even though they ruled against us, no, they actually ruled for us. What the fuck? So this is truly, it's beyond a constitutional crisis. They've already gone full fascist. But now the judicial system is catching up to that, right? So look at this. In the hearing yesterday from Judge Zenis, this is what we get. Judge Paula Zenis is no longer playing with the administration on the Abrego Garcia case. She's going to conduct a thorough 2-week inquiry, which can involve administration officials being forced to testify. We're going to move. There will be no tolerance for gamesmanship or grandstanding. There are no business hours while we do this. Cancel vacations, cancel other appointments. And then here, I'll read you from the article. Zenis' order sets up a high-stakes sprint that may force senior Trump administration officials to testify under oath about their response to court orders requiring them to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the United States. Each day passes, the judge noted, is another day Abrego Garcia spends improperly detained in a maximum security megaprison. Quote, we're going to move. There will be no tolerance for gamesmanship or grandstanding. There are no business hours while we do this. Cancel vacations, cancel other appointments. I'm usually pretty good about things like that in my court, but not this time. So I expect all hands on deck. All hands on deck. So what she's saying is, I don't think you're abiding by anything I've told you. You've made that pretty clear. So now we're going to get to the bottom of this. I'm trying to gather the facts over, hey, what did you do to try to comply with what I told you to do, which you have a court order to do? I'm gathering the facts. And then if at the end of this brief period, so in other words, she's putting it in the fast lane here. If at the end of this period, I conclude you didn't fucking listen to me in any way, shape, or form, or you're giving me the runaround, you will be found in contempt of court. And then what happens? Right? And look, the Supreme Court sort of gave Trump a little bit of an out, a little bit of wiggle room, right? They said, oh, you have to facilitate his return, but you don't have to facilitate and effectuate it, which is the legal way of saying, I understand foreign policy is your realm, and the judicial branch is not going to impede on that. But you still have to try to bring them back, because this isn't really a foreign policy issue. It's more of a contracting issue. They're acting as your subordinate. You made a deal with them. So now you tell them to bring them back. They're going to bring them back. Right? So they gave him that little bit of wiggle room, but the administration, or regime, I should say, is acting so obstinate and not listening at all to any court that now you're forcing the hand of the Supreme Court too, where they're going to be like, you're clearly in violation of the court order. So, all right, Now, I know what all of you are thinking in this moment. You're like, okay, what comes next? Let's say Judge Zenis says, contempt of court. Let's say the Supreme Court looks at it and says, you didn't even try to facilitate his return, never mind facilitate and effectuate, right? What happens then? Well, Axios put together an article. I want to go through it. How judges can hold Trump administration accountable for defying court orders. Some legal scholars are warning that the Trump administration's reluctance or outright refusal to comply with court orders is setting the stage for a full-blown constitutional crisis. In several instances, federal judges have said that the Trump administration is not taking sufficient steps to adhere to rulings. Courts aren't powerless. They can punish the executive branch in an effort to force compliance, experts say. The Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration must facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland man erroneously deported to El Salvador. Officials have contended that doesn't mean they have to return him even after losing several appeals. Quote, the argument that they're in compliance with the Supreme Court's order and the district court's subsequent orders is ridiculous, said David Knoll, a law professor at Rutgers Law School. They're essentially thumbing their nose at the court, Knoll said. White House spokesperson Harrison Field said in a statement to Axios that the administration remains fully compliant with the Supreme Court's rulings. The court's decision was clear to any impartial observer. U.S. courts lack the authority to compel the president to force a foreign nation to return an MS-13 terrorist alien. So just so you know, multiple factual errors in this, lying on purpose. He's not MS-13. He's not a terrorist. Total bullshit. And again, the Supreme Court said you have to facilitate his return. That's what they said. He added, as seen publicly yesterday, President Trump discussed the matter with President Bukele, who firmly stated that El Salvador will not return the individual. The issue is resolved. If a federal judge determines the matter is not resolved, they could opt for contempt proceedings. Here's how that would work, and some steps judges can take when they determine an order hasn't been followed. Could a judge hold Trump administration in contempt? Federal courts have broad discretion to determine whether a party is in contempt of court, according to the Brennan Center, a nonpartisan law and policy institute. The process would start with a judge issuing an order to show cause, Knoll said, which would essentially direct the government to explain why they appear to not be complying with an order. I believe that's where we are right now. In Abrego Garcia's case, he said the court would likely have to first take steps to develop a record about who is making the decisions. Or maybe that's where we are, where they're doing the fact-finding. There are two kinds of contempt proceedings, civil and criminal. Civil contempt, which is outside the president's pardon power, seeks to force a party to comply. Knoll explained. Trump is familiar with the concept. Criminal contempt, on the other hand, is more about punishing disrespect of court authority, but it is subject to a presidential pardon. Trump has experience with this too. So in other words, my reading of this is you're better off going with civil contempt. That's my reading of this. Because if you leave Trump any wiggle room to pardon, he'll just fucking pardon. Because he doesn't give a fuck. He's completely and utterly lawless. He's a total fascist. He's got away with everything in his life. He would just keep doing it. The federal government's compliance with court orders is often imperfect and fraught, according to a 2018 Harvard Law Review article by law professor Nicholas R. Perillo. But the federal judiciary is willing to issue contempt findings against agencies and officials, he wrote. Even when higher courts have intervened to rescue an agency from incurring a budget-straining fine, contempt findings have a shaming effect with a substantial deterrent power. Oh, please. Now we're getting a little silly. Oh, are you going to shame the Trump regime? Are you going to shame the fascists and the robber barons into doing the right thing? They are so far above and beyond shame, it's record-breaking. Their ability to just go out there and lie over and over and over, knowing they are lying and not caring about the consequences or how they're viewed is astonishing. I've never seen anything like it. One imagines even Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime was not this loose with how much they lied. But we don't have a lot of precedent of what's happening when the power of shame breaks down, Knoll said, referencing Perillo's findings. Who enforces court orders? In civil contempt proceedings, Knoll said, the court has really wide discretion to choose remedies, which could include setting fines, freezing assets, and ultimately ordering an arrest. See, now this is what I'm talking about, right? The question would be, well, who do you fine? And whose assets do you freeze? And who do you arrest? Right? Let's put aside the arrest thing for a second because I'm skeptical if they'll be willing to go that far. But would you set a fine or freeze the assets of the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, who's been lying throughout this process the entire time and not abiding by the court order? Would you do it to Stephen Miller, who's been doing the same thing? Would you do it to Tom Homan? Would you do it to the DHS officials who were responsible for wrongly deporting this man? Who would you do it for? I got to be honest with you guys. I'm at the point now, looking at what's happening, I'm fine with them doing it to any of them or fucking all of them. They need to know rule of law still matters. Rule of law still counts. We're not just all going to lay in a chalk outline of ourselves and let you do whatever the fuck you want and ruin people's lives. An innocent man is rotting in a fucking alleged death camp at the moment. Who knows if he's even fucking still alive anymore? And that means extreme times call for extreme measures. Arrests would typically only occur when other remedies have been tried but failed. Okay, so you freeze the assets, you fine them, etc. And then if they're still not complying, then it's like, gotta arrest them. Uh, Although civil contempt can involve being jailed until the person complies with the court order, that is enforced by the United States Marshals, who are part of the Department of Justice and thus under the president's control. Erwin Chemerinsky, the dean of UC Berkeley School of Law in New York, in a New York Times op-ed. Look, guys, this is what I was telling you guys. I made this point a long time ago. That, not a long time, at like the beginning of the Trump administration, that Democrats need to start getting muscle on their side. I hope all the Democrats are very familiar with their National Guardsmen in their state, because there will come a time where Trump will probably try to invoke martial law, invoke the Insurrection Act, and federalize the National Guard. And you want the National Guard to be like, no, I'm under the command of this Democratic governor and not under the command of the president who's giving me an illegal order to do something I have no authority to do. Right? So this is where the human element is super important, and the human nature element is super important, where Democrats need to be working overtime to make sure, hey, we got muscle on our side too. So for the U.S. Marshals here, right, the point is the court can order the U.S. Marshals to arrest somebody for contempt, but more broadly, the U.S. Marshals are part of the Department of Justice, which is run by the president, right? So it's like there's another constitutional crisis that you stumble across. Let's say the court says do it, and then the Department of Justice says you're not doing it. If you're the U.S. Marshal, what the fuck do you do? What do you do? Jesus Christ, man. Retired federal judge Nancy Gertner expressed a similar sentiment to NPR's Morning Edition, saying if Trump wanted to fully not comply, he could direct the Department of Justice not to comply. At that point, you have a full-on constitutional crisis. I hate it when people pretend like we're not in one yet. We are already fucking there, obviously. Such a directive, Knoll told Axios, would be completely unlawful. If an improper effort to block the marshals from conducting their duty occurs, there is a rarely used authority that allows a court to deputize different law enforcement offers to carry out their orders. But he noted you'll have to really sort of go back to the Wild West or the earlier 20th century to find cases where private parties or law enforcement officers, other than the marshals, were being used to enforce federal court orders. This is crazy. So what they're saying is, if the fines don't work, if freezing assets don't work, if the U.S. Marshals are refusing to arrest when you demanded them arrest because they're in contempt of court, technically the court has the legal authority to deputize whoever the fuck they want to enforce the court order. But see, now we're talking, right? Now, because you're going to have to rely on stuff like this in an era where they are totally lawless. The fascists and robber barons are totally lawless. Everything Elon Musk has done since day one has been lawless. He's illegally slashing government programs and stealing everybody's data. None of this is legal. Congress has the power of the purse. He can't be a bureaucrat on the back end, disregarding whatever the law is. That's what he's doing. How many things can they do that are illegal before people wake up to it and realize desperate times call for desperate measures? And so I hope the courts are in conversation with people who can act as muscle and can be deputized, right? Whatever it may be, whoever it might be. I don't know. Are there some, I mean, it seems like a stretch, right? Police departments that are left-leaning? Are you going to have to hire some fucking like mercenary law enforcement officials who might be left-leaning? Does the ACLU have an armed wing? Like, really, what are we talking about here? But this is the point we're at, bro. We've relied far too long on this notion of good faith among our leaders, right? It was all a mirage that like, well, there really is rule of law and it really matters. Well, what happens if somebody comes along and they're like, I don't agree, and I have an army and you don't, so fuck off? What happens? We're there. That's where we are. And so certainly step number one, after you do the fact-finding mission, after you find them in contempt of court, step number one, you better start finding and freezing assets like a motherfucker, right? Fine and freeze assets like a motherfucker. And you could have the conversation about who particularly you do it to. But there's a lot of people responsible for what's going on now. Perhaps you should do it to all of them. But, you know, that Trump would have no recourse on that. He wouldn't have any recourse because that would be civil, right? But eventually, if it gets to criminal, they're going to have to deputize somebody to do the work for them because the U.S. Marshals are going to be blocked by Trump. And I think they're more likely to lean on the side of Trump unless you have somebody in the U.S. Marshals. Trump did this very early on, right? Purge everybody in the military and put in his own little sycophants. That was done with a purpose, knowing now I can get away with anything, right? But maybe did he not do it at the U.S. Marshals yet, right? Are there still some people at the U.S. Marshals who are reasonable and believe in democracy and human rights and rule of law? Maybe, maybe not. We'll find out. But if the U.S. Marshals won't do it, you will have to deputize other people if it really comes to that and the fines don't work and freezing assets don't work. But definitely fine and freeze assets. There's no way around it now. And so we'll see. And then also we'll have to see what the Supreme Court says when they weigh in again. But they were pretty fucking clear last time. It's possible they cave just to try to save face and realizing he's not going to agree anyway, so we'll give him some sort of legal cover. It's possible they do that. Or it's possible they take a stand and say, no, you don't get it. You got to bring this guy back. I mean, the other thing is, it genuinely looks like Stephen Miller is the one who's telling Trump everything about the Supreme Court decisions. Like, Trump is not reading the decisions, and Stephen Miller's telling him, we won. We won 9-0. They're with us. And he's like, that's great. That's wonderful. I love it. And now Trump is repeating that. Is it crazy for fucking John Roberts from the Supreme Court to just pick up the phone and call Trump and say, hey, man, great job. You're doing wonderful. You're really doing awesome. I really love a lot of the work you're doing. But by the way, one little thing, Stephen Miller, he lied to you when he said that we were 9-0 on that case. Actually, we're not. You got to bring back Kilmar. Yeah, there's no way around it. So look out, because that dude lies to you a lot. But hey, great job. Just definitely bring back Kilmar. Click. Right? Like, again, we're in a weird place, bro. We're in a weird fucking place, and everybody's move matters now, right? This is all super important. There's starting to look really fucking Game of Thronesy to me, right? So, anyway, there you have it. That's what you can do in response, and the nation is collectively holding our breath as we watch this. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.